All right, this question is for you, Mr. Olikara. In addition to Wisconsin consumers seeing high cost, inflation is also impacting those who are paying for college or trying to pay off college debt, right? So, do you supporting loan forgiveness across the board to help individuals struggle with rising costs, and also share with us how inflation is personally impacting you?
Well, thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Charles. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. My name is Stephen Olikara, and I'm from Waukesha County. I'm running to change the system, and I'm the only one in this race who has federal legislative experience. And my view on this comes from an unconventional background as the son of Indian immigrants, as a musician, and as the founder and CEO of the Millennial Action Project, which grew to be the nation's largest organization of young elected legislators. And inflation has been brutal on young people and for all Wisconsinites, and the cost of groceries to diapers are going up. And I use the example of diapers because I have a baby niece named Lucy who's a major consumer of diapers. And what I would say on top of that is we need elected leaders who are focused on the root issues here, and that's what I'm doing, which is addressing the supply chain shocks that have happened as a result of the pandemic, supporting the president to use the Defense Production Act to help open up and ease the supply chain bottlenecks that we've had in this country. Thank you.
Supply chain is definitely one of the factors to inflation, but answering the question, would you support loan forgiveness across the board to help those individuals who also are battling with high cost, but also paying for higher education?
It's a great question, and I'm first of all a proud graduate of UW-Madison. I'm the only Badger on this stage, and I will support any bill that's going to cancel student debt for student borrowers. But on top of that, I'm aware, as the person who has federal legislative experience, of what is passable and what's not. What I'm a big fan of is earning your way to forgiveness through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. I want to call on young Americans to serve our country through AmeriCorps by being a nurse in a rural area, and that's going to allow you to open up those opportunities.
Thank you, Mr. Olikara. The most recent Marquette Law School poll indicated that abortion was the #2 issue among voters. 58% say it should be legal in all or most cases. 35% saying illegal in all or most cases. This question is to you, Mr. Olikara. You founded the Millennial Action Project to bridge that bipartisan divide. Abortion is a deeply personal issue that has divided many. How would you navigate the Senate in a post-Roe v. Wade world? And would you support efforts to codify Roe v. Wade?
Absolutely, I will. Thank you, Shannon. And when this decision came from the Supreme Court, it was like a gut punch. And I immediately thought about people in my life, people who I love, who had to make that painful and excruciating decision to have an abortion. And whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, those life experiences are undeniable. And I believe they deserve the freedom and the dignity to make those decisions on their own. But there's something else that happened soon after this decision to overturn Roe, and that was the flood of fundraising emails and text messages that were getting sent to you asking you for $5 or $15. And that to me was revealing of the core issue here, which is the political industrial complex is much more interested in your dollar than it's interested in your human rights. And that's why I'm running to change the system here. You have to talk about money, the primary system, and other issues if you're going to talk about how you build that consensus. I strongly believe if you're not talking about changing the system, you're wasting people's time.
You are next.
Yeah, I think we're actually missing the root issue here. But first of all, I fully support trans rights as a modern struggle for civil rights. But when I saw this issue take on national headlines, I started looking into the data on this, and I saw that, just how much, if you look at the number of trans athletes there are, it's a very, very small percentage. So why is it dominating so much airtime and so much members' time in Congress? Because they know that they can use this as a fear tactic to gin up votes and to gin up money. And that's why I truly believe that members of Congress need to be focused on really my first piece of legislation in the Senate, which is getting big money out of politics. Because the thing that the general public does not see, that I saw walking through the halls of Congress, is that these political consultants, they could care less about your life. What they care about is raising money off of you, and they know that this story about trans athletes is something that's going to scare people and gin up money. We have to fundamentally change that system at its root, and I'm the only candidate running on that issue. Thank you.
Mr. Olikara, the George Floyd Act has yet to pass the Senate. It would increase police accountability and remove qualified immunity shielding for police officers from civil lawsuits. A non-starter for Republicans. What would you support to get this bill passed and help reduce gun violence?
Thank you. I would support this bill, but what I want to say, especially in relation to what we've been hearing here, is just saying nice things on the stage. There's a huge gap between that and actually passing legislation through Congress. I'm the only one on the stage who's been directly involved in passing gun violence prevention legislation through Congress. And this was after the horrific Parkland shooting. Those extraordinary young people who came to Washington, and we worked with them, and they said, we're not here because we're Democrats or Republicans. We're calling on the conscience of our nation to say that young people shouldn't go to schools with the threat of gun violence. And so we said something very simple, bringing together Democrats and Republicans, that the Centers for Disease Control should be authorized and funded to study gun violence as a public health issue. We passed that through both chambers of Congress, gotten it signed into law, the first gun violence prevention bill in over 2 decades. That's what real change looks like. I want to go further than that, including universal gun licensing. If you need a license to drive a car and get training and pass a test, you should do the same thing for a gun.
So what are you referring to when you say we did this? How did you do this? I mean, there was lots of people involved. So what was your role that got this?
Absolutely.
What is your role?
My organization, Millennial Action Project, organizes a bipartisan caucus of young members called the Future Caucus. We brought together Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy and Congressman Carlos Curbelo, Democrat and Republican, both from Florida, to work with these students and come up with a solution. And we did something that's probably common sense in your life, which is if you want people to be bought into something, bring them in early, develop solutions together. That's the difference between real change and just talking about it. Thank you.
Mr. Olikara, again, the question is, knowing that we have farmers here who depend on China's export, how would you navigate to create and protect those here in the Senate?
Yes, thank you. Well, I've spent significant time in China, and I do want to give a shout out to the Wausau ginseng farmers who are supporting our campaign. And I think the key to China, first of all, my foreign policy is called dignity for all. And so what that means is in any discussion about China, we need to first talk about calling out the human rights abuses with the Uyghurs in China, because we need to be standing on principle. But we also need to be building environmental and economic partnerships. The reason why I spent time in China is because I believe we cannot solve global climate change without the United States and China working together. And on top of that, the reason why I believe in dignity for all is because we need a true anti-war U.S. senator. There is significant influence from the military-industrial complex right now. I'm calling to disrupt those funding sources directly to Congress and ensure that we end all the endless wars across the world. Thank you.
Kara, you were an advisor, according to your resume, on a plan that provided solar power to millions of homes in Africa. In Wisconsin, about 1% of the state's electricity comes from solar. What additional steps are needed to scale solar energy, especially in lower-income urban and rural areas?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the earliest pieces of political activism I did was working with Van Jones on a basic idea, green jobs, not jails. And I want to talk about climate here because I believe that leadership is required on this issue. Taking on climate change has been a calling of mine since I was in college. I believe it's the holy grail to pass through the U.S. Senate. And I'll tell you what leadership is not. Leadership is not sitting on a task force producing a report that doesn't go anywhere. What leadership is passing bipartisan clean energy funding through the U.S. Through Congress, which is what I've done, through the Future Caucus that I was referencing earlier. But I want to go even further than that. I have the boldest climate plan on this stage, and that is a 100% clean electricity standard by 2030 to incentivize clean energy entrepreneurs and the private sector to accelerate their transition to clean energy. I also know a lot of clean energy entrepreneurs who need greater incentives and credits to ensure that they can get their products to market. So those are issues I'll actually lead on and pass in the Senate.
So just to follow up on that, you know that solar energy hasn't really taken off here in Wisconsin. You talk about these incentives. Specifically, what incentive would you require or provide that would get more people to buy in?
Well, I mean, to your point that we do have some solar technology here in Wisconsin. We also have wind and many other technologies. I think the key for a government policy here is not to be picking winners or losers, but the government needs to be on the side of the problem solvers, not the problem makers. And that's why all of the programs coming out of the Department of Energy, whether it's the ARPA-E program for breakthrough technologies, whether it's the loan guarantee program, all of those need to be focused on clean energy, reducing carbon emissions, while not picking winners or losers, allowing private entrepreneurs to find those best solutions. So I might mention UW Energy
Your
Institute.
time is up.
Leave it at
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ms.
Well, thank you to our moderators. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. Thanks to everyone who helped me get on this stage. I wouldn't be here without you, especially thanks to my family that's here today. I believe we need a U.S. Senator who's going to fundamentally change the system and put an end to the dehumanizing politics of people like Ron Johnson. That's why I'm the only candidate on this race who's calling to ban members of Congress from fundraising while Congress is in session. So they're actually working for you and not the big money special interests. And by the way, I'm going to commit to that and practice that before that legislation even gets passed. Now, I can imagine when you hear this, you think that this new model of politics, it sounds idealistic. But I want you to know that this is the most practical way to make change, and we've been doing this for the last 10 years. Over 200 bills introduced, 35 passed through Congress with bipartisan support. I'll leave you with this. I believe the number one question you should ask before voting for any candidate is who's prepared to lose their job over doing what's right. I'm prepared to lose my job to do what's right because this campaign is not about me, it's about you. I ask for your vote. We're going to shock the world on August 9th. Thank you.